Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a great privilege to come after my honourable friend for Wickham. And I have to say, one of the most depressing things that has happened to me in recent weeks was learning that he is standing down from this Parliament. Depressing not just because I'm losing someone who is a friend. We entered this place on the same day some 8 years ago. But when he espoused his reasons for leaving, I had to say I agreed with about 90% of them. And it is a very depressing day, and I think he has said exactly what I hope many more thoughtful members would agree with. I also wanted to say I wanted to associate myself with every word of the contribution of my honourable friend for Chichester, as ever he was able to articulate in much more concise terms than I am perhaps able to do so. But I would like briefly to say a few words, if I may, tonight, because I share the almost universal reservations about the speed with which this legislation is being rushed through. I think it is being rushed through for the reasons that a number of honourable gentlemen have said in their contributions, partly out of panic, partly out of a desire to be seen to be doing something, but rushing legislation, particularly, dare I say it, to go through all stages inside 3 days, I think is a great mistake going forward, because it seems to me that this is a time when we need to move towards greater separation of powers, especially between the executive and the legislature, and this bill regrettably takes us in diametrically the opposite direction. I think that we risk politicising the judiciary, who will now stand in judgment on issues of parliamentary process and procedure, particularly if Clause 10 in its entirety comes into play. We will see, I think, and risk vexatious litigation, perhaps driven by partisan political considerations. No doubt there will be some publicity-hungry judges who will also look to flex their muscles to the edge of this legislation and probably even beyond. I believe we are, as my honourable friend, I think for Staffordshire South would rightly have said in his contribution, we are sent to this place on behalf of our constituents, by people of this country, not as bureaucratic placemen and placewomen, but as people who should be able to debate the important issues of the day. Mr. Deputy Speaker, without wishing to harp on too much about how we got into this place, I think it is very important to lay one or two things on the record. The executive were repeatedly warned that the second home allowance was a disaster waiting to happen. And I know this because I have repeatedly warned over many years, and it's perhaps easy for me to be slightly dispassionate as a Central London member. My salary was being kept down as the grandstanding that went on by both front benches, the executive and indeed the opposition leadership on this matter. It's happened going back to the 1980s, I accept, but 3 times in the 8 years that I've been in this House, and also happened over the London allowance in January of 2008. Headline salaries being kept down in spite of independent senior salary review bodies' recommendations, and then a blind eye was turned to the constant increase in the second home allowance, which was never reduced, reversed, or even capped. In July of 2001, there was a huge uplift outside any recommendation from any independent body, so there was no longer, in my view, any real pretence that the second home allowance was reimbursement, but rather it was being used as a salary substitute because the executive failed to have the courage to stand up and make the case for a higher salary going forward. And therein, a culture of absolute cynicism built up. The general public, in my view, understand the need for MPs beyond commuting distance to have a home in London. But their view of a home, a second home, is a rented, furnished flat. So there will be no need for household goods, plasma TV screens, gardening and cleaning bills, no mortgages, no flipping, no remortgaging and maximising of financial benefit. And the capital gains scam and the appalling ongoing scam of Section 292 of the IT EPA of 2003, which makes all of this tax-free, is little short of a disgrace. And I suppose it's like in any banana republic, it is of course the MPs who end up making the law. This did not come anew. This was being warned about, and I'm sure I was not the only member to be warning in these terms, for some years before the balloon went up. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wanted briefly to touch on Clause 5, the second job scrutiny. I fear it is the absolute worst sort of cynicism and rank hypocrisy on behalf of the Prime Minister in this regard, in attempting to embarrass particularly Conservative MPs by conflating the second jobs issue with the allowance scandal. We now have the disaster that the Honourable Gentleman for Wickham, my honourable friend, has rightly pointed out. There has never been any suggestion that outside employment was undesirable or interfering with MPs' duties, nor is there any sense in which it has been part of the scandal that has engulfed Parliament in recent weeks. Indeed, in my view, the real risk is now that MPs will become ever more of a separate political caste. Professionals perhaps in politics from their 20s onwards. It may suit the executive and any future executive for Parliament to become a cadre of super councillors retreating from independent-minded views into a constituency-based comfort zone. But this, I think, would be absolutely catastrophic for public life. Yet this is what this bill will help to reinforce. My honourable friend from North Essex rightly alerted us to the ludicrous anomaly that ministers, remunerated already out of public funds, are exempted from filling in the same timesheets that each and every one of us who has an outside interest will have to do. Yet their extracurricular activities equally impinge upon their ordinary duties as members of Parliament and as legislators. Indeed, it is a compensation for that time foregone, which is the very reason why ministers are paid. I think we need to move towards, it'll be a slow move, I think, towards the idea of eventually trying, I think, to have that separation between the executive and the legislature. I know that means a big change in the way in which the executive will operate, but it seems to me that the role of a member of Parliament should be as a lawmaker. It should be as someone holding the executive to account, particularly important, dare I say it, for those members of Parliament in the governing party, as well as in the opposition party. And this, I think, has been forgotten for the reasons that a number of honourable friends have pointed out. Mr Deputy Speaker, I believe this bill is deeply flawed, not only in its underlying principles, but also in its practical application. The new external expenses regulatory body that is being created sounds so superficially soothing, but experience should have taught us that this government that it will act in many ways, I think, to undermine the internal promotion of proper standards amongst parliamentarians. Instead, I believe that a culture of them and us will be created. There will be systematic attempts to avoid the letter of the rule and a hostility, I think, to the ethic of box ticking rather than an appreciation of the principles that should lie behind any code. We should be trying to inculcate a sense of right and wrong amongst parliamentarians in all of their claims for allowances, expenses, or indeed in any other way. Instead, it will, I think, risk, as we have seen in the past, there will be a what we can get away with culture. And we have already seen the way in which it has been justified as being within the rules, that ludicrously there are now claims for £400 a month for food and £250 a month for petty cash with no questions asked. That is the system that we are moving away from. I fear that a body such as this will simply reinforce a new set of rules. We need these ethics to come, I think, from individuals rather than from a hostility which inevitably will amount against any new regulatory body. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry I've not had a chance to say rather more. We've all had a lot more we would like to have said, but I'm glad to have had a chance to make a small contribution to this debate.